Yeah, that's better, right? Welcome back, Camden Catholic. It's been a minute. I haven't seen y'all in a while, all right? Now, it's about 7:20, and I'm finally thawed out. It's freezing this morning. But let's get into it. So we had Mass today, right? And so we kind of got to rally a little bit. We didn't go over a crazy amount of stuff in class. We're about to go over some stuff right now, all right? So we've been talking about this whole time. Today in class, we're going to talk about how the Pope is going to start getting a little out of order, and then this guy named Johann Tetzel is going to get a little out of order, and then Martin Luther's going to get really upset about it, and he's going to post his 95 Theses, and it turns into a whole big thing, right? So that then began this battle that we were going to talk about today in class of, like, Church v. Luther, ideas versus ideas, right? Before we go anywhere right now, let's go ahead and start talking about one particular thing. This right here is a huge fact. You're going to have to, like, make sure you're not muting this. Make sure you're listening to this, right? Well, you can do subtitles. That's fine. But you need to make sure that you're paying attention. Because I'm going to say a lot of stuff that's not on this, right? Because I don't like this presentation that much. So I'm going to add to it verbally, all right? So back and forth, the 95 Theses is posted, right? The biggest thing that's going to happen is, of course, the printing press begins to shoot Martin Luther's ideas all over the place, right? All over the place. Shotguns them all over the place, right? And in these 95 Theses, he begins to question the authority of the church, right? And then in one of the most ground-breaking instances, hold on. Sorry, it's cold season. Now, and then in one of the most groundbreaking instances that had ever occurred, a meeting was actually called, right? Now, before we go anywhere else, let's remember this really fast. What country, quote-unquote, was Martin Luther living in during this whole time period? He was living in a place called, my hair is so screwed up, the Holy Roman Empire, right? The Holy Roman Emperor at the time was this guy named Charles V of the Habsburg family that we'll talk about later on, right? Germany, did it exist? No, right? So he's hanging out in Nuremberg when he does all of his work, which is a city in Germany, right? Or modern-day Germany, Anyway, amongst the Holy Roman Empire at the time, right? The Holy Roman Empire at the time included countries like Switzerland, northern Italy, like where Milan was, half of Austria, Liechtenstein, where else? The Netherlands, Belgium, right? Denmark at certain points, right? So a ton of these different areas are inside this place called the Holy Roman Empire, right? The Holy Roman Empire is ruled over by two people, okay? The Pope himself and then the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, right? Well, now that Martin Luther's ideas are swirling around and doing things like that, right? The Pope and the Emperor realize we got to get this guy to shut his mouth because a lot of people in our empire, because of this printing press, are beginning to convert to Lutheranism, right? So here's the thing. Write down, many Germans begin to listen to Luther's ideas, right? They begin to listen to these ideas, so they call a meeting. And what you need to write down really, really quick, I'm going to write it up here, like right behind my noggin. I need to, like, find something to, there we go. So this is just, like, straight across stuff everywhere. There we go. So you need to write down this meeting really, really fast. It's extremely important. It's called the Diet of Worms, right? Now, some of you are like, the diet of worms. Ew, he's eating worms? No. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about that really quick. So the diet of Worms, it's actually not like Worms, okay? Worms is actually a city in Germany, and we're also not even pronouncing it correctly, right? For example, when we say our prayer in class, you know that we always go like, in nomine Vaters des Sohnes der Heilige Geist, right? Like, so you don't say W's in German with a W sound, you actually say it with a V. So it's Worms, right? Worms. Worms is actually a city in Germany, right? And a diet itself is actually a papal meeting, all right? A diet is a meeting, and it's Worms. So it's like the meeting of Worms, all right? Or the Council of Worms, but they call it the Diet of Worms, right? And this occurred in a very groundbreaking year in history, and this is another big one that you need to know, 1521. All right, so this is during the Renaissance. Some of you are like, wait a minute, my Renaissance artwork was made like right around that time period. These things overlap, right? The Reformation may have been caused by the Renaissance, but it's not to say that the Renaissance ended and the Reformation began, right? So the Diet of Worms is a huge date and a huge event in history because it's a meeting. The Pope calls the meeting, right? And he tells Luther, to recant and take back his ideas, right? He's like, hey, you need to calm down with all this stuff. You're asking too many questions, because get it? He's got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. If you didn't laugh, I don't like you. So now, anyway, so check this out. The big thing about it is at this diet, he tells Luther to take back the things that he's saying. And then Luther stares the Pope directly in the face, being fully aware of what happened to old Jan Hus, right? And the Hussites and all those guys, and being barbecued alive. And he said, take back your ideas and recant them. And Luther told him, I cannot, under good conscience, take back the things that I know in my heart to be true, right? So, because his biggest beef with the indulgences, this idea of pomp and circumstance, the debate over transubstantiation, all these other things. And so he refused, and he walked out of that meeting alive, right? And after he walks out of that meeting alive, the Pope excommunicates him, right? He excommunicates Luther, and he excommunicates all of his followers, and he tries to interdict him, right? So hoping, and of course, that he expects that some of his followers will now take care of this Lutheran problem for them. Was it successful, though? Nah, not at all, right? Not at all. So, at the Edict of Worms then comes out, right? And the Edict of Worms actually declared Luther to be an outlaw and condemned his writings, right? You yourself and your family could be excommunicated and actually possibly brought before the Inquisition. Remember the Inquisition? Like, just somewhere in your notes, just write Inquisition. It's still a thing, right? So, now that you could be brought before it and possibly tried for heresy if you believe the things that this man is saying, right? Now, this, of course, begins that entire debacle of, is this really about religion and faith, or is this more about politics at this point, right? So Charles V condemns his writings, and they begin to hunt him throughout all of Europe, burning towns and villages. Wars are started over this whole thing. And ironically enough, here's the crazy part. This is a really, really important piece. Luther never even intended to do this. He planned on staying Catholic his whole life, much like Erasmus did, right? But he unintentionally starts a new faith called Lutheranism, right? And the people that followed the beliefs that he outlined within the 95 Theses actually began to call themselves Lutherans. So the very first successful denomination of Christianity is the Lutherans and the Lutheran faith, right? Because here's the big three guiding beliefs and the big differences between Lutherans and Catholics now at this time. So we now have Catholics and Protestants, and our first type of Protestant is Lutheran, right? The big three key beliefs of Lutherans are grace alone, faith alone, Scripture alone. What you'll notice is that these things just do this, and it's why the Catholic Church at the time, and why I'm asking you this question of is this more political or religious, is actually coming up, right? All these things do when you really look at it, these three, that doesn't say dope, it says Pope. I just can't write very well. So, grace alone, faith alone, Scripture alone. The word alone is in there a lot because they emphasize the belief that the relationship that you have with your faith is between you and God, right? So what does that do to the office of the Pope and the church hierarchy? And that's a reason why many Catholics at the time hated it, right? So why their Catholic higher-ups and the ecclesiastical councils hated it, right? Because grace alone is, here we go. Make sure you jot this down next to it. Grace alone is the idea that the only person that has the ability to save you is not your priest, it's God, right? So now, again, I know I teach at a Catholic school. I'm not saying that they're right. I'm just trying to add some emphasis. You understand what I'm saying? Just making sure y'all know. So alert, alert, Mr. Terry is not advocating for other faiths. All right, so anyway, now, grace alone is the idea that Lutherans preach that the only reason that you go to heaven is because of the grace of God. It has nothing to do with what a priest does for you. All right, so if you understand what I'm saying is that he believes that that's why he believed these indulgences were so out of order. That's just a man, right? That's a secular being. He's not God, right? So faith alone is another big premise, right? The Lutherans believe that in your heart of hearts, right, in your faith, that as long as you have faith and belief in God, salvation will await you. It is not necessarily an order of sacraments that you have to complete, right? So, and here's the biggest one, though. Scripture alone. Scripture alone flew in the face of many Catholic doctrines at the time, right? The idea that Lutherans preached was that the Bible is the holiest text and that you have to be able to read it for yourself. So it advocates for translating it into other languages. When the Lutherans came around, the Bible was almost immediately translated into German, right? So, bam, those are their three big key beliefs. Grace of God, your faith, and reading the Bible on your own are the things that are going to get you to heaven, right? Which also brought up the huge debate that we talked about in class today, the transubstantiation debate, right? The idea of, is that piece of bread a representation of the holy body and the blood and things like that, right? So now going forward, though, there were some other reformers that pop up later on, okay? There are other guys like John Calvin, right? John Calvin is a Frenchman. He creates Calvinism, and it operates on the idea of predestination, right? Now, we are going to talk more about this guy in class tomorrow, okay? I got to go a little further in there with him because he's very, very, very important, all right? So John Calvin, French, created Calvinism. Predestination is the big guiding idea of them. They're extremely conservative. Write that word down. Conservative. Calvinism is the idea where it's like church attendance is super required, and predestination is that God knows you're going to go to heaven even before you're born, right? So like that your life, he cancels out the ideas of free will, right? So John Calvin and the waves that he's going to make now are going to be very important. And then on the back end of this, we'll be able to discuss like how wars and violence are going to break out later on. We'll talk about one other guy named Zwingli later on, which is a very, very good guy to talk about. And like a lot of different disparities are going to begin to break out over religion, okay? So jot this guy down. We're going to talk about him more in class tomorrow. And I'll talk to you guys later. Glad you had a flip. Hope that for a couple of you, it's the first one you've ever done. So that's really, really awesome. But I hope you all have a great evening. I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great evening, Camden Catholic.